Hello, everyone, and welcome to this deep dive episode of FP Next, powered by John Deere. I'm one of your co-hosts for this farmer and rancher-driven podcast, Sarah McNaughton-Peterson, and I'm here with Kurt Arns.
Hi, Sarah. Yes, we're powered by John Deere, so for all of your equipment and technology needs, see your local Deere dealer.
Well, Kurt, spring is officially here, at least according to the calendar, but here in the North Dakota area, we've got some lingering snow still. But I saw a Facebook post the other day where a farmer was actually out tilling his field already in southeast North Dakota to get ready to plant. And of course, soil temps aren't ready yet, but it seems like every spring this year where farmers are just itching to get into the field.
Yeah, I was in North Platte just the other day for the beef plant ribbon cutting at that town. And there were a few tractors out in the field. Unfortunately, there was about 60-mile-an-hour wind, so there was a lot of dirt blowing. It's just been way too dry out west, but I think, when the weather's nice, people are itching to get in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I remember to mention this right away. If you're listening on YouTube, you might already realize this is a video episode. But for everybody else on our podcast platforms, if you don't recognize our guest just yet, as soon as he says hello, many of you actually will already know who we have with us here today.
Yes, we're so fortunate to have Max Armstrong today with us. He is a legendary farm broadcaster who we've been lucky to work with here at Farm Progress. Max's involvement with Farm Progress goes back to 2005 at least, when he first co-hosted and co-created This Week in Agribusiness with Orion Samuelson. And now Max is enjoying retirement, but I see him an awful lot. He's still around quite a bit. Max has been named the Farm Broadcaster of the Year, as a plaque on the WGN Radio Walk of Fame in Chicago, and was named an honorary master farmer by Prairie Farmer Magazine. And that's just a few of his accolades. Today, many of our listeners enjoy seeing Max on This Week in Agribusiness, and especially his regular feature, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, and that is Max's Tractor Shed.
Absolutely. And of course, Kurt, Max is joining us from his tractor shed. So let's get right into it. And Max, thank you for joining us on FP Next.
Sarah, what a pleasure to join the two of you. Yeah, you went through that, Kurt, you went through that lengthy bio there. I think it just says the old guy's been around a while. But I've been so fortunate to be able to live my dream. When I was growing up on the farm in Indiana, I wanted to be in broadcasting. And at the age of 24, I went on the radio in Chicago and have had just a wonderful run over the years doing whatever it is we've done. And that included covering commodity markets in Chicago. That was back when the traders were in the pits, standing in the pits, face to face, eye to eye. The trading community in Chicago was 5,000 people setting the markets for the world. Now I love it when on some of the TV reports, they'll say, we're going to the Chicago Board of Trade. And they'll show a picture of the building on LaSalle and Jackson. Well, the Board of Trade these days is a massive data center about 35 miles west of downtown Chicago, covering about 16 acres. But back in the day, people were very much involved in it. That was one of the things that was a lot of fun about the early part of my career, being involved with those folks in the trading community as well.
So, Max, you have been involved in This Week in Agribusiness as, such an important part of our Farm Progress family. Can you tell us a little bit about, how you kind of got into that, how it was created, and what it was like working with Orion Samuelson back in the day, too?
Well, Orion was the grandfather of syndicated farm television, I guess you would say. He started on syndicated farm TV across the country in 1975. I joined him 2 years later. We continued until the opportunity we had to start our new show, This Week in Agribusiness, in 2005. And what a great opportunity it was to then link up 4 years later with Farm Progress. And that involved my doing radio broadcasts at the same time. We've been on radio stations all over the United States, along with great local TV stations. The RFD channel, we were involved with RFD TV from day one. And it's been a privilege to meet so many people, not just in rural areas of the country, but in the cities too, by way of our involvement, both Orion and I, on the radio in Chicago. I was full-time on the radio there for 31 years while we were doing the television. He was full-time, I think, for close to 60 years on the WGN stations in Chicago.
I know every time I've seen you at Husker Harvest Days or at the Farm Progress Show, you've just got a crowd of people around you, and everybody is so excited to visit with you and get to meet you. And you had a really cool story. I know you are a red tractor guy, but I do see a little bit of green back behind there. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to have that little bit of green in your shop of red?
Yeah, the neat thing about this antique tractor avocation is it cuts across all the lines and involves so many great friendships. And there are some guys that call themselves the Open Tractor Mafia. They have a preference for green. And one of the fellas, David Farrell, lives maybe about 15 miles from me here. And he gifted me with that green tractor. But, it's just the neatest thing. You meet people from all walks of life. David is a land contractor, also has some cattle. He grew up in agriculture. I've met state troopers, physicians, certainly airplane pilots. A good friend of mine, a retired Southwest pilot, lives just about 10 miles away. He has an amazing collection of toy tractors. So it's one of those things that really cuts across all professions. And if you go to a farm toy show, you'll see that all ages are involved as well. And many of the folks cross over. They may have the real old tractors like this one, which has a story behind it, or they may have some of the toys too.
When I was a kid, we would go to a lot of threshing reunions, the old threshing bees. And I still kind of continued that. There's still a lot of them across the Midwest. And we continue to take my kids when they were young going to that. And one of the best parts about those threshing bees has always been the toy tractors, and going back way back to tractors that we used to play with when we had a sandbox on the farm and we're kids. How, talking about toy tractors, but also antique tractors, it's kind of a fraternity of people all across all walks of life, of course. So how did you kind of get to enjoy and get involved in the antique tractor network, I guess I would call it?
Your question is so timely, Kurt, because it was 30 years ago next month that I bought my mom and dad's old farm hall. It was in their auction of their farm in southwestern Indiana. And I had the sale bell. I was in the broadcast operation in Chicago, downtown Chicago, and a couple of veteran engineers, the guys who flipped the switches and turned on the volume. Actually, one of them, Donnie Albert, was the radio engineer out at Wrigley Field who he would put Harry Carey on the air, as a matter of fact, control the volumes for the legendary sportscaster Harry Carey. Well, Donnie looked at the sale bill that I showed him for that sale that mom and dad were going to have, including that farm hall, and he said, "Hey, kid, you're not going to let this international get away, are you?" And I said, "Well, how would I haul it up to Chicago?" He said, "I've got a trailer. My sister lives down there. I can haul it for you." And I said, "Well, where would I put it? My garage in the suburbs is full." And the other engineer, John Folker, said, "Well, how many farmers do you know? How many hundreds of farmers do you know in a 150-mile radius of Chicago?" So those two guys convinced me to be the winning bidder on that tractor in the spring of 1995 in my mom and dad's auction. Subsequently, when I talked about it on the radio the following Monday, guys started calling in. Farmers from, within a 100-mile radius of Chicago saying, "Hey, we have this club, the International Harvester Collectors Club. We want you to know about it. We want to help you, and we want you to get involved." And subsequently, that opened so many doors, Kurt, to getting involved with some of these people. As I said, Sarah, it's a real neat fraternity, and people will do things for you. If you've got a problem, if you need any help, all you have to do is just make a call, get on the phone, and they'll guide you through it. I'm working on my old International truck out here in the shed, trying to get it ready for the big half century of progress, which is another story. But I've been calling guys who know the truck thoroughly and asking them questions, and they know it from one end to the other. They say, "Have you tried this?" "Oh, yeah, I'll try that."
I love it. I know in our last episode, we were just visiting with Jennifer Keel about kind of like that fraternity of people who own old tractors and that tractor crossing for the Mackinac Bridge. And it just is always so fun to hear the stories. And truthfully, if you haven't guessed, I do not know that much about antique tractors. And so when we were talking about doing this episode, I'm like, Kurt, you're going to have all the insights and the nitty gritty details. And I will just continue working my way up in my knowledge base on these old tractors. But tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up on the farm and then getting to bring that piece of history from your family farm somewhere in the Chicago area, wherever it ended up.
Yeah, I grew up in southwestern Indiana, which is about midway between St. Louis and Louisville. 250 miles, 270 miles south of Chicago. But in that old farmhouse, I would listen at night to the Chicago stations. I wanted to be on the radio in Chicago or St. Louis or Detroit, one of the big cities. And, all the time I'd be out on one of Dad's tractors, one of those farmhouses, listening to the radio thinking, man, those guys are in air conditioning. That was in the pre-cab days, the open station days. And I would dream of being in broadcasting. And so it was just a wonderful opportunity when I had the chance to do so. But to come back to something you mentioned, those threshing bees, Kurt, they are a neat event. There's some great ones all across the country. But we started the Half Century of Progress in 2003, and that was in conjunction. I don't know if you know the background. That was in conjunction with the 50th anniversary of the Farm Progress Show. And the manager of the show at the time called me. I think that was even prior to the Mad Youngman days. The manager called me and he said, "Hey, we want to celebrate the 50th anniversary. Want to get some antique tractors out there." Well, I had a friend just a few miles from that show site, the late Darius Harms, and I knew that he knew everybody around with all of the tractors. So I reached out to Darius, and when I did so, it was like throwing gas on a match. And he said, all right, we got to get all of these tractors there for the weekend before the Farm Progress Show. And we got them out of the field. We were combining soybeans, plowing, disking. It was such a spectacular event. We decided to do it again 2 years later, and we moved it to the old air base at Rantoul, Illinois, and called it the Half Century of Progress. And so it is held every year when the Farm Progress Show is in Illinois. It's the weekend before the show at Decatur. And as the late Paul Harvey would have said back in the day, and now you know the rest of the story.
Yeah, and I have never made it to that show, but it is definitely on a bucket list for my sons and I, for sure. So we are going to make it one of these times. Speaking of the farm shows, I mean, you've been just such a mainstay on stage and around the farm shows, Farm Progress Show and at Husker Harvest Days over the years. Do you have any favorite farm show stories? We've asked Matt Youngman this and others over, the time we've been doing the podcast, but I know you probably have so many stories you could tell us, but have you had some favorite interviews that you've done at the farm shows?
Oh, I don't know where to start. I guess one of those was during the first term of President Trump, and his Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, was on stage with us, with Orion and myself, and we're sitting there, and I had been told that the president was going to call. They clued me in. In fact, I was with the advance crew when they came through, walked around, looked at the PA system and everything, and they said, okay, here's what's going to happen. We think the president will call at precisely 12:07. He'll take the call. Secretary Perdue will take the call on his phone. Then he'll take the microphone and put it down to the phone. Well, I'm thinking about how all of this could go wrong. This looks like a train wreck in the making to Max Armstrong, who really wants to tightly control everything. What could possibly go wrong in this mess? Well, we're sitting there, and I had asked the secretary about contact with the president. Do you talk to the president very often, et cetera? And then about that time, Sonny Perdue's phone rings. We're on stage in front of the entire audience. And Orion blurts out, oh, that's probably the president now. He had no idea. And it was the president calling. Sonny takes the call and he's, oh, Mr. President, it's good to visit with you. Put the microphone down to the phone so the whole audience could hear what he had to say. Well, as you can imagine, and as we know so well, the president isn't necessarily programmed to 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 2 minutes. He's going on. And he says, hi, Max. Hi, Orion. He continues to talk. And at some point, Secretary Perdue picks up his phone and he says, Mr. President, I think we lost the connection. We can't hear you very well anymore. Yeah, I think we lost you. Well, okay, we'll have to continue, I guess. We can't hear you. I think the secretary decided it was time to wrap up the conversation. I don't know for a fact. I'm just telling you what I witnessed from about 7 feet away.
That is so fun. And how many times, Kurt, have we had to cut each other off like that? Just been like, you know what? We got to wrap it up and someone's got to make the executive decision. That must have been Secretary Perdue potentially in that moment. But kind of talking a little bit more on the antique tractor front, where did you actually come about your love of antique tractors? Like, what was the moment that you were like, this is it? This is my thing?
That's a great question, Sarah, because I had this conversation just a few days ago with a childhood friend of mine. We were having lunch together in southern Indiana, and I said to him, "You remember the weekend that I bought that tractor at Mom and Dad's auction? I drove it into town. You stopped me on the street and you said, hey, Armstrong, what did you think of that tractor when you were 16? How much did you like that old thing when it was 16?" And in truth, it took me a while to come around. I guess by the time I bought the tractor at the auction, well, it was 1995. So how old would I have been? I was, 45, I guess, at the time. But anyway, I just never imagined the joy that would come out of it, the conversations. And it doesn't make any difference where you are. I was at a black tie event at the National Press Club in Washington, and a gentleman came up to me. I did not know him very well at all. And he said, "Say, I have to ask you, I've seen your television, seen your television show. I've seen your tractor. Who painted your tractor? I have to get one painted." And I've been in airports. I've been on airplanes, where the pilot saw me reading Red Power magazine, which is a publication all about the old International Harvester tractors. And he said, "Can I borrow that?" So it's really one of those things that, as I said, it involves people from all walks of life. The Mecum auction folks did tractor auctions for quite some time on a regular basis, and just to be involved in those was such a treat. I met John Deere's great grandson. It was just he was at one of those auctions, and a friend of his said, "I think there's somebody you might want to meet." And so we met and had a great conversation with him. He talked a lot about his mother, as a matter of fact. It might have been his father that was guiding the company back in the day, back in the 50s, but he said it was really his mom who provided a lot of the impetus for the international work around the world, taking that John Deere brand to other continents. So to meet people from all walks of life and from all disciplines, university professors. I'm trying to think. I've had ag school deans on tractor rides with me. I don't think we've ever had a governor. We've had some state senators, state congressmen and women go along with us on rides. This almost sounds like I'm being a little bit sexist here, Sarah. I realize that, only talking about men. But the reality is a lot of women are involved in these tractor rides and tractor events, too. That's another thing we haven't talked about is all of the tractor rides, which have developed through the years. And those have been a great fun as well.
So Max, you do such a nice job every week on This Week in Agribusiness on Max's Tractor Shed. It's something that I always look forward to and myself just personally. And one of the cool things about that I found over the years in watching is how you're able, I know that your viewers send in photos of different tractors and how, there's all kinds of different colored tractors, all kinds of different histories. And then there's always a lot of personal family history behind it. A recent one that I saw that I'd never heard of, you talked about the Uncle Sam tractor, which was so unique, and something, there's only a few of them made. And that was really nifty. I was going to ask you, how much fun is it? And how did you develop this tractor, the tractor shed, idea, that segment? And I mean, how much fun is it to tell people's family stories? I mean, that is really the great part of some of these antique tractors is the stories behind them.
Yeah, I started it not long after I got this tractor. I started it out as Tractor Tales, I called it. And then we continued to tell the story every week. I think I've done somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 tractors over the years, close to it. We've done it almost on a weekly basis, not quite, because of the holiday seasons, for example. But and it's in my words. It may be that individual telling me about their tractor, but then I tell the story, which which I like to do. Actually, this sounds like a lack of humility here, but in many instances, especially with the tightness of the time of the segment, I can tell the story a little bit quicker, maybe not better, but at least a little bit quicker than the individual who owns the tractor. But I like to hear some stories, and some of them are very poignant stories. Some of them are joyful. Some of them are sad. We were at an event, and a woman came up to me, and tears were streaming down her face. And she said, "Oh, my goodness, your tractor brings back so many memories of my father who died on a farm on a tractor just like that one." And I said, I'm so sorry to hear that. And I'm so sorry to bring back such sad memories. And she said, "Oh, no, Mr. Armstrong, you have to realize that I was with my dad out there so many times on our grandparents' farm, and I saw him and the joy that he had with that tractor. And it brings back far more happy memories and pleasant memories of my father than the accident that he had." So you just never know. Sometimes you really get a surprise from folks when they come up and start pouring their hearts out, really, about the tractor. And this has happened time after time at the Farm Progress Show through the years. You ask me about favorite stories, Kurt. Goodness gracious, many of those have been, as we've been at the show, whether it's been at the hospitality building or somewhere else on the grounds of the Farm Progress Show. People will come up sometimes, they'll thrust a thumb drive into my hand and say, here are some of my tractor pictures. Or they'll pull their phone up, as I am wont to do, and they'll start showing pictures of that tractor back home. And so many of them, are family heirlooms. And maybe they were out there and they looked for them for years and all of a sudden found them. There's a story I'm going to tell in the next week or two, I think. There's a fellow in North Carolina. He's an agriculture teacher. He grew up around farmhalls. He was always around farmhalls. He's a big farmhall fan. He has his dad's farmhall. However, a few weeks ago, he found his grandfather's Alice Chalmers. So that prompted him to cross over, at least in this one particular instance. And again, it's that strong family connection. For me, it wasn't only knowing that it was a tractor that Dad had, but it was being on these tractors. On a Saturday, a cold Saturday in the autumn, and you're out there after you're replaying the football game you're in the night before, you're dreaming and scheming of what you wanted to do someday. And that was me. I wanted to be on the radio. So I'm sitting out there listening to these guys coming through the tractor radio, or we had a head hugger, we called it, which fit around the ears, cut out the engine sound a little bit. Those tractor radios, you remember those, Kurt, that sat up on the fender? That and the head huggers probably resulted in more hard-hearing old guys like Max Armstrong than anything else.
My wife tells me that I can't hear anything anyway. And I blame it on those days of riding our tractor on the cultivator in the summer with that big, Fender radio blaring Minnesota Twins baseball games. That's what I listened to when I was out in the tractor all the time. And so, yes, I absolutely recall that very much. We also did have like a headset thing when we did get a cab tractor, but it was so darn noisy inside those year-round cabs that it didn't do a whole lot of good.
Yeah, it could be pretty doggone noisy before the comfort of the modern cabs and certainly the better acoustics in there. And quite often it was a battle over the radio. You mentioned the Twins games. If you were within about 100 miles of Chicago and you were 16, 18, 19 years old, you'd be tuning over to WLS, the old Prairie Farmer station, by the way. That's another story. You'd be tuning over to WLS to hear the latest rock and roll hits being played. It stopped being the farm station in 1960 and became the big rock station with a lot of my friends that I met subsequently over the years who had worked there. But then after you had been on the tractor, Dad would come along to use that same tractor, and he'd turn that noise down and get the Cubs game on WGN. That battle, I maintain, was played out in one city after another. Minneapolis would have been a great one. What was the big rock station in Minneapolis back in the day? There was an AM station. It was a big rocker there.
Yeah, I don't remember, and because our station was out of Yankton, South Dakota, it was an AM station that we listened to the Twins on. So it was but WCCO was the radio station with the Twins.
Right, absolutely. No, it's around St. Louis, I'm sure the same thing happened. The kids would have been listening to the songs on KXOK out of St. Louis, and Dad would turn over to KMOX to hear the Cardinals. That happened, I'm sure, all over the United States back in that era of the tractor radios in the early years.
Absolutely. And so, Max, I have a short background in broadcast radio, and I remember trying to make sure wherever I was traveling in the state or the region, I could find the station to listen to my past reports to make sure they sounded good coming through my car radio as they did when I recorded them. But what was kind of your favorite thing about radio broadcast itself? Because it sounded like you said you wanted to grow up and be like the guy on the radio, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I never knew it would be so joyful, though. And the neat thing about going to work in Chicago, and especially at the age that I started there, was the opportunity just to be a part of people's lives. And I've reminded several of my broadcaster friends about this, especially young people who want to get into broadcasting, or they're a part of something regular like a podcast that might be listened to on a regular basis or watched on a regular basis. The opportunity that you have in a positive way to affect other lives is something that is really kind of cool. You can cause them to think about things. You can brighten their lives, Sarah, at a particular time when things are difficult in one way or another, when they're stressful. There's a lot of stress going on in our lives. And sometimes by making things a little more joyful, maybe having a little fun while we're doing it. I had the wonderful privilege of working with some great personalities in Chicago as I came on board with Orion. Orion had already been at WGN 17 years when I went to work with him there. And we were in the building with the television station. So he crossed back and forth across the aisle and worked both stations in the same days, in the same hours sometimes, which was really kind of neat. But to think about the fact that you were invited into their cars, into their offices, in many instances, many of the grain traders who would go downtown from the suburbs, where they would listen to us. I had a guy come up to me in a restaurant about 2.5 years ago, and he said, "Would you believe I used to listen to you when I would ride down to the Board of Trade?" He said, "I was just a kid starting out, and I'd ride with a veteran trader to the train station. And we'd sit there listening and digesting the information." But, again, there's that opportunity, I guess, in this business. And I think it's the case in many others where you face in some way or another with the public that you can brighten their day in some way when they're having a tough day. And I think there's something special about that, Sarah.
Absolutely.
I had a question. I was going back to the tractors. When traveling Nebraska and the Great Plains, when my wife is with me, a lot of times we like to stop at antique tractor museums. There's the Tractor Test Museum in Lincoln on East Campus, which is really cool.
Yes.
Right next to the Tractor Test Laboratory, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Have been to some really unique ones. Found one in Sarah's country a couple of years ago, the South Dakota Tractor Museum, which is just off the interstate at Kimball, South Dakota. I'm sure that you have stopped at a few, right? So do you have a favorite tractor museum or a couple of them that really stand out in your mind?
Yeah, and there are tractor museums all over the world, believe it or not. I mean, I've been in one in Hamburg, Germany. There's a pretty neat one in Ottawa, Canada. There are so many across the United States, and we have one at Penfield, Illinois, where my Farmall 560 stays, and that one houses. We opened that up at the time of what they call the I&I show. That's held every July. That's the Illinois and Indiana Antique Tractor and Gas Engine Club. And there are 2 tractors there on loan from the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. And so that's kind of a special display. But that's just opened up during that show, the I&I show. And it's just a few miles down the road from where our Half Century of Progress is held in August this year. By the way, let me give a little plug for the dates. The Half Century of Progress this year will be the 21st through the 24th of August, which, as you know, leads into the Farm Progress Show, which is the 26th through the 28th of August. I think that's right. 26th through the 28th this year. There's only one down day between the 2 shows. That's the way we set it up right at the outset. So, there are many great museums. One I talk about often is the one at Perryville, Missouri, which puts it about 100 miles down Interstate 55 from the Gateway Arch. It's just about 10 minutes off of I-55. and it's a great one called the American Tractor Museum. That Uncle Sam tractor you mentioned a few minutes ago, Kurt, is in that museum, and it's such a delightful display. It's not haphazard at all. They've put things in there to tell stories, and there are a bunch of unusual tractors. We call them, sometimes we call them oddballs and orphans, because there weren't many of them made, just like that Uncle Sam tractor, and there aren't many surviving. Maybe the only one known to survive, such as that Uncle Sam tractor that I believe came out of Montana many, many years ago. So, look around. You can find some of these. I think that museum in Perryville, Missouri is open at least Monday through Friday. And you can go to their website, the AmericanTractorMuseum.com. I actually serve on their board, so I should make note of that. But I'm proud to promote all of these museums that preserve our history. And that's what it's about. That's one thing we derive a lot of satisfaction from. Sarah and Kurt, we look at these people that are going across the old air base there at the half century of progress. Quite often they're on a utility vehicle where you've got 3 generations, and they're sharing in this experience. And Grandpa is able to share that, hey, this is how we did it back in the day. That old plow going down through there, I pulled one like that. And the neat thing about the half century show and being involved in it all of these years, I'll be there every minute of every day, all 4 days. I wouldn't miss it. But it becomes a bucket list event for a lot of people to say, this is one more thing I want to do in my life. And that's pretty special for us. And we can interact with folks in that way who've really made that event so special in their lives.
Well, it sounds like for those people who might be planning on attending the Farm Progress Show, it sounds like they should go a couple days early and get to see some really cool things if they're making the trip to Decatur. It's got to be the 2 hits at once, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's just 1 hour and 1 day away from the Farm Progress Show. And we set it up so that that day in between, you can see some sights. In Springfield, Illinois, the Lincoln Museum Library is there. It's a great place. It's a great display of his life. I actually have a book that I donated many years ago. It was Abraham Lincoln's report, true. Abraham Lincoln's report from the Commissioner of Agriculture in 1862. And it was appraised by a Lincoln book expert who said this was the official report from the Commissioner of Agriculture to President Lincoln in 1862. Kurt, you're a historian, you know this. That was the year that Abe Lincoln established the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And this was given to me by an executive in Chicago who heard me on the radio, called me one day, said, my wife and I are leaving town. This is something I've had for many years. My kids are just going to put it in a garage sale. They don't care. Maybe you'd want it. Well, I had no idea the magnitude, the historical significance of that book. When I went to his house, he and his wife were sitting there in the living room eating supper off of boxes. And they were literally getting ready to leave town the next day. And he came out with this book in a plastic bag, and that is a part of the collection. They display it from time to time at the Lincoln Museum and Library there in Springfield. But again, it's one of these things, to the point we were making earlier about the wonderful connections that those of us in agriculture media, such as yourselves, have the connections you have the chance to make throughout your career. And it's something special about that, I guess I'd say.
Yeah, and Max, and I'm sure you probably remember this too, but I'm pretty sure that Lincoln was a subscriber to Prairie Farmer in the 1840s, probably because they used to have that subscription. It was either on a wall or someplace in an office in St. Charles back in the day. And I remember thinking how cool that was when I first got hired on, with Nebraska Farmer. The other thing, I think, talking about history, not too many people have their faces on the back of a toy tractor box. That's really the ultimate thing. But I think that you maybe have some show and tell for us. Is that right?
Hang on. I'll be right back. Stay tuned. Here you go. This was done in conjunction with the Farm Progress Show. And the folks at Scale Models in Dyersville, Iowa, were actively making toys in America in those days. And we modeled my tractors, the Super H and the Super M, 1/16 scale tractors. You still see these floating around at toy shows from time to time. I think they bring $100 or so. The white box kind of takes a beating a little bit. This one is kind of special because it was signed by Donnie Ertl, Joe Ertl's son, and by my dad, James Armstrong, back in the day. And then on the back of the box, there's the guy. And the fun part of this was getting involved in 4-H and FFA. I said, I'd like to do some good with these. And I said, whatever comes to me or would have come to me in the sale of these models, I'd like to donate to 4-H and FFA, and I'd like to put the logos on the box. Well, I called the FFA headquarters in Indianapolis, and the nice lady there that I've known for some years said, oh, that's wonderful. That'll be great. Thank you. So then I went to track down permission to use the 4-H logo, which is owned, maybe you didn't know this, by Uncle Sam. And I had to talk to 9 different people at the USDA back in the day to get permission to use that logo. And the gentleman said, fax me a copy of the box. Let me see what it's going to look like. He said, as you can imagine, we just want to make sure it doesn't wind up on a 6-pack. So I said, no, it's going to be something. And I feel like we did some good with it over the years. We donated some to FFA chapters and helped them. Many of them have their own farm toy shows. Maybe you knew that also, Kurt.
Yes, many of them do, and what a great tradition too. So that was kind of a cool way to contribute to those great youth organizations that we support so heartily all the time. But also, what a neat way in bringing in that kind of what a great hobby on the toy tractor side.
Yeah, it's fun. As we noted earlier, many of the people who love the old tractors love the toys, and vice versa. They find it maybe a little more economical to collect these. However, you've been in sheds, you've been in basements. Sarah, you've seen some of these collections where people have hundreds of them. I try not to go down that path. When we moved a few years ago, I told my wife, I'm going to have a herd dispersal. Okay, I'm going to move out some of these tractor models. And then I started collecting them again. It's a sickness, as some people would say, I guess.
As long as you don't have to move as many, I feel like it's allowed. If you clear a few out, makes for a few less moving boxes, then you can just pick right back up where you missed off, right?
That's right. I haven't turned loose too many that I wish I had back, but they did make, I think, about 5 sets of these that were gold in color. And there was an FFA chapter that benefited from my set a few years ago, and I was told the other day that those that have achieved some collector value, several magnitudes above just the red ones. But hey, I helped them out hopefully at the chapter. And by the way, my 560 tractor, which has been at some of the Farm Progress shows, was restored by an FFA chapter at the Prairie Central chapter in Central Illinois, Fairbury, Illinois. We did the restoration work on that, working with Chapter 10 of the International Harvester Collectors Club. That's one more thing we didn't talk about, the FFA Tractor Restoration Contest that takes place every year. And it's a neat thing. It gets young people involved in the mechanics, working on things, understanding how things work. Folks in the community reach out and become a part of that to give them guidance. I helped judge that contest one year, and it was work. I want to tell you, it was a challenge. And then you didn't see the actual tractor. You saw the record books, you saw the photographs, you had the opportunity to ask questions of the team members, and then they would walk down the line and shake hands with you. And then you realized, wait a minute, these hands have been on a wrench. That this person has done the work. They know, what's involved in all the mechanics. And some of those folks have gone on to excellent careers with companies like John Deere, Case IH, Caterpillar, in the world of farm equipment, AGCO. So it's been a great contest. And I've only been on the periphery of it, but the times I've been involved with it, it takes so much time to judge it, to be honest with you, and it's convention time. But those who do it, I know, benefited the way that I did all those years ago.
Max, a lot of people think of the antique tractor thing as kind of an older farmer's deal, but I think the young folks are just as involved, just as enthusiastic, if not more so. And what I love, like at the Antique Tractor exhibit at Husker Harvest Days, which I'm really familiar with those fellas and families every year. But they always say, that a lot of the young FFA members, when they come through, they are just ecstatic to see those old tractors. And then, to hear the stories about the tractors and how they were used. And it's just, the interest is so much fun, and it really crosses generations in many ways. So yeah, I really understand exactly what you're saying. And that is a really neat FFA program for sure. Well, Max, we're about ready to wrap up today, but we sure want to thank you for joining us. I think we could talk tractors and ag for a long, long time, and I think we're just going to have you back. But we sure appreciate your time today with us, and I know that our listeners do too.
Well, I'm honored to be on with both of you. I appreciate the opportunity. Carry on. Keep up the great work. I appreciate everything you guys do.
Awesome. Thank you, Max, again. And those links we talked about today, including the Half Century of Progress, the Farm Progress Show, and maybe I'll find some links about the FFA Tractor Restoration Program. Those will all be in the episode description. So if your interest is piqued from our conversation, you can do some extra checking. But Kurt, like you said, I think that'll wrap up our deep dive episode of FP Next, powered by John Deere. And again, all those links will be there. Thank you again so much, Max, for coming and joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah. Kurt, take care. We'll see you somewhere along the way soon.
You bet. Now, to our listeners, we want to thank you for tuning into this episode of FP Next, allowing us into your tractor cab, your truck, on your farm, in your shop, and in your fields. And a special thank you goes out to our sales, digital, production, and marketing team members who put in a lot of work with us. And if you want to be sure not to miss any top stories, sign up for our Farm Progress Text Blasts, which bring the hot stories right to your inbox.
You can sign up for those text alerts by texting FARM, FARM, to 20505. Be sure to follow along with Farm Progress on social media to stay up to date with ag news and more. And make sure to stay tuned for our next episode of FP Next, which will be a shop talk. And we're going to dive deep and talk about water availability and see what's left in many of those aquifers farmers utilize.
Yep, this is a very important topic to all of us, especially farmers in the High Plains, Great Plains area. So we're really excited to dive in and discuss this topic.
Absolutely. And you can follow along with FP Next by listening and subscribing on your favorite podcast platform, or make sure you watch the video episode of this deep dive on YouTube or Farm Progress Online, and be sure to leave us a review if you enjoy the show.
Now, Sarah always says 5 stars or nothing, but look, we had Max Armstrong on today, so we deserve 10 stars, I think.
Absolutely. And remember, if it's agriculture, your friends at Farm Progress have you covered. Here's wishing you good yields, and high weather. We'll see you next time. It's a lot harder to remember what all I'm saying for all